Today, this is our final video on EKGs. So we're just going to cover kind of some review of the most pertinent stuff, and then we're just going to learn a couple more rhythms that didn't really fit into other parts of this. So I'm doing it now. Alright, so this is what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about key points to take away from this course: asystole, agonal rhythms, paced rhythms, noise/artifact, and then a disclaimer and clarification, just since there's variations in information based on what book you read or class you take. So I'm just going to go over all that at the end too. So key points, and I'm actually going to write this down, otherwise I will forget. So we're going to talk about leads and electrode placement. We're going to talk about waves, intervals, and segments. We're going to talk about the interpretation steps, reviewing those. And we're going to talk about the most important information for identifying each type of rhythm. So sinus, atrial, AV junction or junctional, and ventricular. All right. So for lead placement, we're first going to discuss three lead. So we're going to review 3 leads. So I'm not going to draw the colors in, I'm just going to use black for this, and I'll tell you what the colors are, but I'm just not going to do that because that takes a little too much time. But so for the right arm lead, you can place it here or here. And remember, really you could place it anywhere that's on the arm here, or like the right side of the chest, so like right within that border, and then down the arm. You could place it anywhere in here, but this area and that area are the 2 most common. They are limb leads, so that means they're supposed to be out on your limbs further. That just gives a more accurate picture. However, if you recall me saying, that does make it more sensitive. Because it's more accurate, more sensitive, that means that little movements will cause artifact, which we're going to discuss later in this video, but it makes it harder to get a clean picture. It's just more accurate when you do get it that way. But if you have someone that's moving around, or for whatever reason, you can put them closer in on the torso, and that will cause less noise or artifact, which again we're going to discuss later, but it's just better to have them out on the limbs if you can. So now left arm, I'm sorry, for the right arm, that one will be white. It'll be the white wire. The left arm will be the black wire, and you can place the left arm electrode there or there. And again, with that, you can really place it anywhere on the left arm or on the left side of the chest, but those are the 2 most common places. Then we have the left leg, which you can place here or like here. And again, just as with the arms, you could technically place it anywhere on here or right here, but it's better to put it down there, and that is the 2nd most common place. And the important thing when you put it here or with any electrode really, is you don't want it to be over a bone. So like how the shin goes right there, you wouldn't want to put it there. It should be over a meaty area, because that will keep it from having trouble. Like if it's over a bone, it's hard for the sensor to detect anything, so it's best to put it kind of on the calf there. Then we have our right leg, which you can put there or there most commonly. Alright, so those are placement areas for our 3-lead or 4-lead. I'll actually draw that up here so you, whoops, so you know, 3, 4, 3-lead, 4-lead. People call them both things. I actually like calling it a 4-lead, but it's technically not a 4-lead because it gives you 3 leads when you look at it, but just know either way. So now I'm going to quickly, actually we'll just talk about leads now, since we kind of just talked about the placements of electrodes. It would make sense to talk about leads now, and then we'll go into 12-lead placement. So when you put the electrodes on, it creates this kind of triangle like so, imaginary triangle. Oh gosh, I need to redo that. That was terrible. Yeah, like that. So this is called Einthoven's triangle. Oof, still kind of rough, oh well. And this tells us what leads are looking which way, or which, yeah, I guess just that. But from this, which would be the right arm, over to the left arm, that is lead 1. And remember, leads are the space between electrodes. They're not the actual electrodes themselves. That's why it's not really accurate that people call 3 leads 4 leads, even though it's a common thing. And like I said, I call it a 4-lead. It's not accurate just because it only gives you 3 views, because you have 4 electrodes, your right arm, left leg, right leg, but it's only giving you 3 leads. So just remember the difference between electrodes and leads. So that's lead 1, and then from the, we'll go right arm to left leg, that is lead 2. Because it's the space between electrodes. That's what makes a lead. So left arm to left leg, that is lead 3. So lead 1, lead 2, and lead 3, with your heart sitting kind of tilted like that. That's what makes lead 2 the best lead, because it kind of looks in the same direction that the electricity flows through the heart. Alright. So now we'll talk about 12-lead placement real quick. So I'm going to use the term IC for intercostal, because I don't want to have to write out intercostal every time, because that would take forever. So just know that's what I mean by that. So, excuse me. So V1 is going to go like right there. And V1 is going to be located 4th intercostal space. C, and I'm just going to draw an R for right. So you'll go from the clavicle or the collarbone down, feel the first space between the ribs along the sternal border. You'll count down to the next one, second, and you'll go down third, fourth. It'll go right there, just to the right of the sternal border. So that's where V1 goes. V2 goes in the exact same place, but on the left side. Fourth, I see, oh geez, left. Oh my gosh, left. Jeez, I am not good with this little mouse pad thingy. Oh my gosh. V2, that's a 2, if you couldn't tell, V2. And then we're going to skip V3 and go to V4, which is mid-clavicular line, so that would be like right here. It's that little indentation kind of where it goes in on your collarbone to the shoulder. That right there, that's your mid-clavicular line. So like right there, you'd follow the mid-clavicular line down and you'd go to the 5th intercostal space. So like right there. V4. So 5th I see mid clavicular is what that means. So right there, whoops, I used a different shade of red. Oh well. And oh my. This is just okay, there we go. So then you'd go back to V3, and that would go between V2 and V4. So right there. V3. Then, once again, we're going to skip, and we're going to go to, whoops, I'll write it here, V3, I don't want to write between, whatever, I'll write it between, geez, 2 and 4. Alright, so we'd skip now to V6, which is going to be 5th intercostal space, mid-axillary line. I'm just going to write ax, which is just armpit basically, right down the center. So 5th intercostal space, mid-axillary, so it's kind of hard to see on this with the angle, but it's right there. V6. And then we'll go back to V5, which will go, I'm just going to write bet, between V4 and 6. So right there. V5. So again, to recap, V1 goes 4th intercostal space, right side of the sternal border. V2 goes in the same place, but on the left side. Skip to V4, which goes 5th intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. V3 goes between V4 and V2. Skip to V6, which goes 5th intercostal space, mid-axillary. Is that right? Yes, mid-axillary. And then V5 goes between V4 and V6. All right. I think we got that. Yes. All right, so now we're going to talk about waves really quick. as well as intervals and segments. Oh my gosh, it's going to take forever to delete. Come on, there we go. Alright, so in a single cardiac cycle, meaning a single heartbeat, the impulse will normally start up in the SA node, as we know. Oh no, I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. Alright, so it'll start up in the SA node and it'll produce that right there, which is our sinus, or which is our P wave, which tells us that it originated in the sinus node based on the shape. So that's our P wave. And then we'll have that, which is our Q wave. Oh no. Is it going to delete everything now? Probably. Oh, well, it's not the part I wanted to delete, but okay. So for it to be a P wave, it needs to go above baseline, which would be this line right here, the flat line like that. That's your baseline. I'll even write it, base. So it needs to go above that, and a P wave, a sinus P wave, should be upright, round, and symmetrical in lead 2. So that is a perfect P wave, and that would mean it came from the sinus node. Then we'd have this little flat space there, and then if it goes down without going up, so nothing like this even, or even like a slight thing like that, it needs to go directly down like this. Oh, if it works like that, that would be a Q wave then. If it goes directly down from baseline after the P wave, which there doesn't need to be a P wave, but I guess I should just say if it goes directly down from baseline, that's a Q wave. Then, if it starts from below, or if it starts from baseline and goes straight up above baseline, that would be an R wave. And then coming down, it's still an R wave until it goes past baseline. So right like there, that's what makes it an S wave. Then we have that, which is our T wave. And we refer to the QR and S as the QRS complex. And that is ventricular depolarization, or beating of the ventricles. Whereas the P wave, if you remember me saying a million times, is the atrial depolarization or contraction. The T wave is repolarization, or you can think of it as recharging of the heart so it can beat again. So then our intervals, actually I'll just real quick, we'll talk about QRS complexes. Remember the rules for each of these waves. So again, with Q waves, it has to go directly down. For the R wave, it has to go above baseline. So if we had this, whoops, pretending that that's like actually equal, that would just be a Q wave. If we have this, that would just be an R wave. If we have this, that would be a QR. And if we have this, that would be an RS. Alright, if that doesn't make sense, then go to, I believe it's the second video, and watch that again, and that will explain in more detail the criteria for certain waves to be considered certain things. So now going back to our rhythm up here, or our cardiac cycle. Actually, I'm just going to draw a new one. So for intervals, we have criteria for our normal intervals. So, oh, that's terrible, but oh well. So from the P wave to the QRS, that would be our PR interval. Whoops. And that should be between 0.12 and 0.20 seconds. So basically it should be smaller than one large box on the EKG paper, which would be 5 small boxes. It should be less than that to be normal. Then we have, use purple, from the beginning of the QRS till right over here, which is called the J point. I'll write that too. J point. That is our QRS width, and that should be less than 0.12 seconds or 3 small boxes. Oops. 1, 2. I'll just do that down there. 0.12. Should be less than that. So less than 3 boxes. That's a normal width for QRS. And then J point criteria, just to remember that, that's when it goes up from the bottom of either the S wave or the R wave or wherever, but it's where it first, after the QRS complex, goes to the side, and usually the line will get thicker there. So that's how you can tell exactly where it is. And that's important for things once you get into 12 leads as well. So those are our main intervals. There's also RR interval, which would be the peak of this R wave here over to the next one on the next QRS. So boom, it'd be to there. So the RR interval helps you determine regularity. All right, so now let's talk about interpretation steps. So the first thing we're going to do when we look at a rhythm, God, this takes forever to erase all this. So when we're first looking at a rhythm, we want to check regularity. So we do that by looking at the RR intervals and seeing if they are equally spaced apart. If they're not, that's irregular. If they are, that's regular. So once we determine whether it's regular or irregular, we can calculate the rate. And there's 2 methods for doing that. Or there's 2 main methods, I should say. There's other ones too, but if it's regular, you can count the dark lines on the EKG paper from the R wave, a peak of an R wave that lands almost directly on top of one of those dark lines. You count the dark lines from there till the next R wave peak, and it goes 300, 150, 100, 75, 60, 50, and so on. Just remember that as it gets slower, that gets a little less accurate. But that's one way to do it. You can only do that though if it's regular. If it's irregular, then count the number of QRS complexes within 6 seconds and multiply that by 10. All right. Number 3 would be P waves. So we want to first look for the presence of P waves. We want to make sure there's no extra or missing ones. And if there are P waves, we want to make sure or check to see if they're sinus P waves, so upright, round, and symmetrical. If they have any weird appearance or they go from positive to negative or anything like that, that tells us the pacemaker is somewhere besides the sinoatrial node, the SA node. So when we identify that there are P waves, we want to determine if there's sinus or not, and we want to determine if there's any extra or missing ones. Then we're going to check our intervals. So we're going to check our PR interval, our QRS interval, and that will help us to determine if there's any AV blocks. So, and also in 12 leads, that'll be helpful for some things as well. So we check our rate, our regularity, our rate, P waves, intervals, and at that point, based on all that information, we should be able to name the rhythm. My dog's here. Blue. Oh, she just opened the door and ran away. That's cool. So yeah, those are our interpretation steps. Different books will tell you different ways. Certain classes might tell you different ways, and that's fine. This is just the way I learned it, and it works. So if you don't have a way, or if wherever you're learning EKGs tells you that there isn't a way, or that tells you they don't tell you a specific way, then you can use this way. I think it works pretty well. It covers everything good. So yeah, just remember that, because that's really important. All right. And there's one last thing I meant to talk about, which we'll actually talk about at the end. So one of our last rhythms, which is actually lack of a rhythm, is asystole, also known as a flat line. So this is like what you see in the movies, where like boop, and they just defibrillate them and they come back, which by the way doesn't work in real life. You cannot shock asystole, and here's why. Because with asystole there is no rate, no waves, no intervals, or measurable qualities. So there's no electrical activity in the heart, or it's so minimal that the monitor can't detect it. So that's basically just, there's nothing going on in the heart. It's not like pulseless electrical activity, which I don't know if we talk about that in this, or if we already did. I think we might have, I don't know. But basically it's not like that, which if I didn't discuss that somewhere, which I should have, that's where there's a regular rhythm on the monitor, but there's no actual pulse with it. So there's electrical impulses, but no reaction from the heart. It's like that, except there's not even electrical impulses. So there's just nothing going on in the heart. And to defibrillate someone, you do need something. You need one of two rhythms to be able to defibrillate them, because all defibrillators do is reorganize a rhythm. They don't generate a new one. So movies are not accurate with that. You cannot shock someone with a flat line. Or you could, but it won't work. So yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just this flat line like that. Doesn't do anything. So if you see that, that's just nothing, in which case you just keep doing CPR or pronounce them dead, depending on protocol and circumstances and all that. So asystole means nothing. It means there's nothing going on in the heart at all. Agonal rhythms are also asystole, but they'll have occasional, you're doing that, and then every now and then you might have like a little weird like, and then it'll just, or you might see that, but I mean it'll be like so infrequent, more like this. So if you see that, don't mistake it for an extremely low heartbeat. That's not really an effective complex right there, so that's still asystole, or what we would call an agonal beat or rhythm. So just treat it as asystole. So paced rhythms. Paced rhythms, this is for people that have pacemakers. So there's different types of pacemakers. So there's AV pacemakers, or there's atrial pacemakers, which stimulate the SA node, and that's all they do. So that means the ventricles will receive impulses and generate them fine, but the atria, for whatever reason, doesn't work. So you have a pacemaker that will go off, or it may not work sometimes, so a pacemaker that will go off sometimes when needed to stimulate the atria to contract, which will then stimulate the ventricles. So whenever the pacemaker generates that or initiates that electrical beat in the atria or SA node, it'll then travel down its normal pathways to the ventricles, which work fine, and then they'll conduct the impulse through them. So there's just atrial ones, which are called atrial pacemakers. Then say your SA node or atria work fine, so you don't need a pacemaker there, but for whatever reason your ventricles have issues getting the rhythm or the impulse through the AV node or something like that, then you could have a pacemaker that works just for the ventricles, and that would be a ventricular pacemaker. Then you can have both. If you have issues with both your SA node or atria or your ventricles / AV node, you could have what's called an AV sequential pacemaker, which will pace both the atria and the ventricles. So now we'll take a look at what that looks like. So these little vertical lines right here, those are what are called pacer spikes or pacer marks. So that is where the pacemaker is firing. It generates a perfectly vertical line. So they used to be really noticeable, like this one, the first one on the top, it would be something like that almost, but as they get better making them and stuff, those little things get smaller and smaller, so they might be extremely hard to see, but if you look closely you'll be able to find them. And usually, if you're having trouble, like if you see something like that, a weird thing that doesn't make sense for waves, like you're like, oh, that's not a P wave, or it's not a small QRS complex, like what is that? Just remember pacers, because it could be a pacing. And usually if you look like down on the bottom one here, that's not a Q wave, even though it does go down from baseline, which you would expect with a Q wave. It's super vertical, and I mean Q waves are supposed to be too, but this one is almost like it was drawn with a ruler or something. It's like perfectly vertical. So that should tell you or give you a hint that it's possibly a pacer mark. So up top here, that's an AV pacer, and you can tell that because, see on the fourth one here for instance, it comes right before the P wave, and then there is a P wave. So if we look at this top one, after I erase all this, all those complexes, or all those cardiac cycles rather, they all have a pacer mark before the P wave, and the QRS complex is normal in width, and there's no weird line like that there, so that tells us it's just an AV pacer. And the bottom one is a ventricular pacer, and with ventricular pacers you'll have a wide complex after it, so that's why the QRS is so wide. So don't be surprised by that. That's how it will just be. But if you notice, I don't really see any P waves in that. Maybe some. Maybe that's like, yeah, actually there might be a P wave. But either way, it doesn't matter. Point is, that's clearly a QRS complex, and there's the pacer mark right before it. On the second one, it's right there. Third one right there. So that tells us that this is a ventricular pacer. Alright, so there are different things that can go wrong with pacemakers. There's something called failure to capture, and there's also just malfunction, which are the two most common things. So up top here, that is just a failure basically. So pacemakers' jobs are to keep a pace or keep a certain rhythm to the heart, keep it beating at a certain and regular interval. So we see one here, we see one there, And these are ventricular because right after them there's that wide QRS. See it there, there. And so all of these, it's at a pretty regular interval, right? So that's working fine. But then we have this long stretch right there before this one. So in the space in here, it should have fired probably like right there, but it didn't. So that would be a ventricular pacer failure or malfunction. I would actually use the term malfunction just because there's also failure to capture, but either way. So you could call it ventricular pacer failure or malfunction. Then on the bottom one, that's also a ventricular pacer, but you see we have one there, but no QRS afterwards. And we have one there, got one there, 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 whoops, there, there, and two more here and here. So some of those, as you can see, are not generating QRS complexes. It should be those ones. But if you look at the pacer spikes, those intervals are pretty regular. So when you have a regular interval, it's not malfunctioning, it's firing when it's supposed to, it's just the ventricles aren't responding as they should. So in that case, we call it a failure to capture, or capture failure. I don't want to write out capture, but I will. So failure to capture. And again, just to review, whenever you see pacer spikes that are not at a regular interval, that would be a failure or malfunction of the pacer. Whenever you see pacer spikes that are at a regular interval, but they're not always generating either a P wave or a QRS complex, that would be a failure to capture. Alright, so now we're going to practice these, I believe. So up top here, got a pacer spike there, 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 and there. So this is probably the interval we're looking for. So we'd expect one there, probably there, and then there, maybe there-ish. So because we're not seeing anything, that would be a that'd be an atrial failure or malfunction. I'm just writing atrial pacer malfunction. On this bottom one, here are our pacer spikes. Those abnormal looking perfectly vertical lines. So some of them aren't generating impulses, however, do have a regular interval. So that would be a failure to capture, which I actually think the top one is too, now that I look at it. Yeah. So disregard what I said, sorry about that. That would be atrial capture or failure to capture. And then this one down here would also be failure to capture for atrial pacer. So both of these are the same. I don't know why I put the same ones there, but whatever. Apparently that was important to talk about twice without talking about anything else. So now artifact and cycle 60 interference. So artifact is anything that's not truly something going on in the heart. It's just another type of interference. So in this bottom one here, if you notice the baseline, it's like all over the place like this, and then down there like that. That's not actually the heart doing that. That means the patient was probably moving when they were doing that, so it caused all that weirdness. So artifact is anything in there that's just also referred to as noise or just not actual information. It's usually caused by some external thing, so it could be because the electrodes aren't on good enough, there's not a good enough connection with those, the person's moving, shivering, things like that. That would be artifact. Then cycle 60 interference is usually caused by things like electronics or radios or something like that too close to the monitor. That will generate this thick black line, which is also not something going on in the heart. It's just the interference from those like radio waves or whatever it might be. Sometimes you'll also see something that looks like this when the electrodes aren't connected good enough, which that's not cycle 60 interference, but it looks the same. So, but all of these are noise. There's just the difference, artifact being like movement or something from the external environment. Cycle 60 is pretty much just electronics or radio waves or things like that that are interfering with the monitor. Alright, so this is just my final disclaimer now that we're finally at the end of this crash course, the EKG crash course. So basically with different textbooks you'll get slightly different information. Same with classes or schools you go to. They may teach you slightly different things. Pretty much all of it's right. It's just something to be aware of, that there's going to be those variations, and that's just kind of how it is with really everything school-wise, I guess. There's just tiny little variations, but yeah, it's all correct. Just go with whatever your school says, which is actually a point somewhere down there. So intrinsic rates, here comes the dog. Oh no, there she goes. So along with the first thing I said, intrinsic rates, I've read a couple of different books that say different things. So I looked up intrinsic rates and tried to find what the most consistent numbers were. And the ones I found were the SA node has an intrinsic rate of 60 to 100. The atria are 60 to 80. The AV node is 40 to 60. And the ventricles are 20 to 40. There are, like I said, some books that will tell you different, and it's not necessarily wrong, but I think this is probably the most accurate because I've checked multiple places, and this is the numbers that I have found most consistently. So I would go off of those personally. Follow your class's instruction and use this only as a supplemental resource. So also, along with the last 2 points I made, don't assume that what I have told you here is the exact way for everything, or that that's the one and only correct answer. Just know that there's those variations, so go with whatever you are being taught, because if you want to pass, you want to go with what you're being told in that class, because that's what they're going to test you on. So don't be like, oh, there's just some random guy on YouTube that told me this, and then fail the test. You don't want to do that. I made very sure that I presented the most accurate information and thorough information that I possibly could, but just be aware of that. Due to variations and stuff, it might not be exactly the same, so just go with whatever your class says and use this as supplemental support. Always follow your agency's protocols. And finally, what does EKG interpretation mean? We've gone over through all these videos what it actually means as far as interpreting it. But remember the key point or the key word in that, which would be interpretation. Okay, it's your interpretation of what you think is going on. So of course there are very obvious things that fall into the criteria of a certain rhythm, but in the end it's really our own interpretation. So that means that even though you technically can be right and wrong, at the same time, that's all it is it's interpretation. It's kind of what we see when we look at it, in a way. And to kind of point out what I mean by that, there's this thing that I learned that people will tell you all the time, you'll probably hear. What happens if you show 3 cardiologists the same EKG? The answer to that is you'll get 3 different answers, which again, because this is EKG interpretation, so that's usually what they actually do to determine what a rhythm truly is, especially if it's a complex one, is sometimes they'll just show it to like a few different doctors or cardiologists, and basically whatever one most of them agree on, that's what they'll call it. So because it's interpretation, so some people will say, oh no, it's this rhythm, some might say it's that rhythm, and it's kind of, you know, sometimes it's more obvious and everyone should know what it is, but there can be times that it's weird, and in that case it's really just your interpretation and whatever rhythm everyone agrees on, basically. So just know that it is a good science, and it is pretty much a perfect science for how it works and records it, but as far as determining what the rhythm is, that part can get a little, could be a little bit of a gray area, I guess. So just remember what interpretation and EKG interpretation means, and just be aware of the fact that there's those differences, and sometimes it's more opinion based. And remember what will happen if you show 3 cardiologists the same EKG, because that will help you to remember that there are variations, and in the end it is only EKG interpretation. And also, just as a little funny side note, don't tell them that when you go into the hospital, both the joke and what I'm about to tell you. So if I see something and I don't really know what it is, or I say something that ends up being totally wrong and everyone looks at me like I'm an idiot, I just say it's my interpretation. So technically I can't be wrong, because in that sense you really can't. It's the way I see it, so technically you can't say it's wrong, which of course you can, but I just say that because I think it's funny. But don't say that, because trust me, they don't have a sense of humor, the people you're telling this to, and they won't think it's funny. So learn from me. Alright, so next, the last video that we're going to have, this is the last instructional video teaching things. You've learned all of basic EKG now, and you should be able to read 4 leads. So next, the only video we have left on this is our final rhythms. We're going to do a final practice test type thing, where I'm just going to show random rhythm strips of all different types that are within 4 leads, so sinus, atrial, junctional, ventricular, and then also some agonal and paced rhythms and all that. And we're just going to break them down as we go. I'm going to have you try and figure it out on your own, so I'll explain more when that video comes, but the goal is to have you try and figure it out yourself, and then listen to what I have to say as far as my reasoning or my interpretation of why I think it is what it is, or what I think it is. So yeah, I think that just about does it. There's a couple more things. So one last thing I wanted to talk about, though, with paced rhythms, just those are technically rhythms of their own, and it's because, like, for instance, with ventricular paced rhythms, there's that wide complex after, that makes it hard to interpret. So a paced rhythm is just a paced rhythm. If you see pacer spikes, automatically you just call it a paced rhythm. So even if you think it looks like a sinus rhythm, if there's a pacer in there, it's just a paced rhythm. So refer to it as such if you see those pacer marks, paced rhythm. Okay, I think that just about does it. So good job if you made it through all the videos, and congratulations on finishing that, and hopefully it has helped you out a little bit in some way or given you a different perspective on things that may not have been clear before. And I hope you enjoyed the EKG Crash course. I'm going to have a bunch more videos. Hi dog. The dog's looking at me. I'm going to have a bunch more videos on this channel here soon. And I'm also going to be doing an advanced EKG interpretation. Oh, hello. Interpretation video where we'll talk about 12 leads and learn how to interpret those. So thank you if you guys watched all these. I really appreciate that, and have a good day, and I look forward to having you watch further crash course videos that I post. Alright.